Good day to everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Office 365 to the Rescue. We hope that you will find today's session informative. We have put together a really good panel of Office 365 experts to discuss with us how Office 365 helps and impacts our litigation and discovery plans. With us today are Greg Cancilla, RVM's Director of Forensics, who's been responsible for preservation, identification, extraction, documentation, and interpretation of digital data. He has been performing forensics investigations since 2003, and we are very proud that Greg was once again named Best Expert Witness in Technology by the New York Law Journal for 2018. Ben Hubble has more than 12 years of experience in corporate legal departments for multinational companies, including the Wendy's company for the last 6 years. As the enterprise-wide records manager, Ben incorporates vendor management and training and implementation of technology, in particular Office 365, to streamline workflow processes and promote adherence to a sound information governance and eDiscovery policy. We have Samantha Miller with us, who is the Vice President of Discovery Services at Fidelity Investments. She leads an internal team of experts in data identification, preservation, collection, analysis, and production, along with managing a spectrum of alternative legal providers, both domestic and offshore, analyzing and reviewing data. Samantha worked with internal software developers to build a proprietary legal holds and discovery workflow system, which has dramatically improved efficiency, cost effectiveness, and record keeping of the in-house discovery program at Fidelity. Finally, my name is Sean King, and I will be the moderator for this webinar today. I am the Chief Operating Officer at RVM and have 20 years of history in advising clients of information governance obligations and solutions, discovery response options, and legal technology. I've been a member of the legal support or legal technology teams at K. Scholler and Ropes and Gray, and I'm very honored to be moderating this panel today. Just as a housekeeping note, we ask that if anybody has questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to send it through the chat program in GoToMeeting webinar, and we will get to your questions at the end. In the business world, Office 365 has become pervasive. It has become the fastest adopted enterprise technology implemented in corporations since the establishment of a computer. Businesses, big and small, are moving to Office 365 because of its ability to reduce operational costs by getting rid of cumbersome storage and network infrastructure, reduces the need for overhead IT resources, and provides a robust program that updates and enhances the software with little effort on your part. Adoption and implementation of a technology at the pace that Office 365 is being rolled out can be jarring, to say the least. Companies are having to rethink their records management policies and practices. Security professionals are having to reconsider their thoughts on cloud-based security and update their policies and practices. And legal needs to adjust, again, to new technology. This technology can have a significant impact on the scope, cost, and outcome of a litigation. Having been in this industry for 20 years myself, I have found that legal is often the slowest to adapt to new technology. Much of that latency is for good reason: risk management. In our experience at RVM, we receive the most inquiries into how to use or extract information from Office 365, from searching to collection to export. Today, we are going to talk about some of that. We are going to discuss some basics into getting into Office 365, and then we're going to discuss how to use Office 365 for legal holds, running searches to identify data for preservation and collection, and how to get the data out and work with the results. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. Ben, I'd like to start with you. What are some of the things that people need to understand about using and getting into Office 365?
Thanks, Sean. Hello, everyone. As you asked, really the first thing you need to understand, and this might be basic for some of you, but you need to know what type of license of Office 365 your company has. There's many different types, and each one comes with different features. So in order to access the eDiscovery features of Office 365, you have to have at least an E3 license. So that's step one, knowing what you have. There are also some variants beyond the E3. There's also an E5. Those are the two most popular. E3 gives you the eDiscovery capability, and E5 gives you advanced features. There's also can be an E3 Plus, or the ability to add on features of an E5 to an E3. But for this exercise today, we're going to assume that most of you have a standard E3 license. So as we talk about what we're doing, it'll be mostly towards an E3, and we'll point out where an E5 may have advanced features or could be useful. So once you know what you have an E3, that allows you to access the Security and Compliance Center. It's within the Compliance Center that the eDiscovery tools are located. If you're responsible for performing Office 365 eDiscovery for your company, then you must make sure that you have access to Security and Compliance Center. Because what all is housed in this center, it's not unusual for companies to really lock down access to it and require the ability to get in to be different than a normal login experience, such as requiring you to have an administrative user ID that's different from your normal login, and also multi-factor authentication. If your company, if you have access to your Security and Compliance Center now, and your company is not doing these things, you may want to talk to the relevant people about doing so as a good security measure. You'll notice throughout this, as we talk, that having a relationship with IT is key. As Sean mentioned, legal being late to adopt, you need to have a seat at the table with IT. It seems to me that Office 365 is being pushed out to companies through other departments. Typically, IT is the one that has a relationship with Microsoft and leads the company down that path. Sam, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you've covered all of the critical points. I think with the admin rights, like you mentioned, that is critical. And in our situation, we actually ended up, my eDiscovery team had to collect data for other business units because we hadn't really thought through the admin rights and who can access Security and Compliance Center. So we were taking on some other job responsibilities for a while we figured that out.
Very good. So now that you know what type of license you have, you know where you're going, you're in the eDiscovery Center, you're in the proper place. What can you do? At a high level, you can hold, search, collect, and export pretty much any data that is within your Office 365 environment. It's very important to clarify that the data must be in your cloud environment. These tools only work in Office 365. They will not search any of your network drives, desktop files, anything else that's stored on-prem. So part of a good information governance strategy is to have a plan for handling this hybrid environment. Once you've moved to Office 365, are you going to move everything to the cloud? Just email, just personal network drives? Does your license give you enough space to do so? And typically, every user gets a terabyte of data in their OneDrive account, but a terabyte doesn't last like it used to. So you need to make sure you're aware of what data is actually accessible to you within Office 365.
Samantha, how are you using Office 365 for your legal holds?
So we started off by using Active Directory to manage our legal holds, and having that sync with our in-house homegrown legal hold system. We had it feeding Active Directory, but we had a couple situations where custodians were getting removed from that group accidentally. So we've moved on to PowerShell scripts to manage our legal holds at this point, and that is being handled by the eDiscovery team. And they are using it to preserve currently all data for the custodians associated with that specific matter, because it's actually very manual to create the holds in a specific matter manually. So the PowerShell scripts help with that a lot. My eDiscovery team they're pretty technical folks, unlike myself, so they had some, experience with writing scripts prior to this, and, working with Microsoft, they gave us a few templates that we could use for PowerShell scripts to fit our needs. And so currently we're preserving everything. Our goal is to use the PowerShell scripts to preserve by date range, but we are running into some little hiccups with recurring calendar items. So our current state is to preserve all for the relevant custodians in the matter.
Ben, how are you using Office 365 for your legal holds?
Well, we're doing more of the basic. If we jump back a slide to kind of talk about creating specific holds, or there we go. I can talk for a second here about just how you set up a matter. How do you set up a hold? What Sam's doing is, once the matter's set up, using PowerShell to put people on the hold. But how do you even get to that point? We're just doing the basic functionality that Office 365 provides. Once you're in the eDiscovery Center, then you have the choice between a content search and the eDiscovery Center. So we're going into the center, creating a new matter, adding the appropriate people to that. Same as Samantha said, holding broadly, issuing a broad hold. I think it's important to point out here that you need a naming convention. You want your matters to follow the same naming convention, and then the searches within that matter to have a convention, because that's going to carry through the whole matter. You imagine you get to the end of the case, you've exported all this data out. The naming convention helps to keep the files in line. That's something that we do when we're setting up matters for the first time. We use Active Directory to determine who to put on the hold. If it's a large matter, that's where something like PowerShell is really helpful, to add 60, 70, 80 people to a given case. And then as far as what we're holding, it depends on the matter, but you can hold, like I said, anything that's in Office 365, or you could hold just a SharePoint site, or just one user's email. It's really intuitive and up to you to understand what's available and to use it all to the best of your ability.
So that's great. Thank you. So kind of moving on a little bit with some of the benefits and challenges of Office 365. Ben and Samantha, what would you say are the challenges and benefits of using Office 365 for your legal holds?
Samantha?
I can start out, sure. I think the challenges that we've faced are, being in this, we have our own private tenant, but, everybody's using the same Security and Compliance Center within Office 365. So as Microsoft rolls out changes or enhancements to Security and Compliance Center, it's hard to keep up with them all because there's no real, you don't get an email when they, do a big update to Security and Compliance Center. So keeping up on their blog and with the changes that they're putting in can be a challenge at times. And also working with some of the Microsoft applications that are available. We're in the process of piloting Microsoft Teams and Yammer, which are, they're collaboration tools that have chat functionality. So we're, really trying to get our hands around how that functionality works and how can we thread the chats together, as well as bring any associated documents that are attached, which sometimes live out in SharePoint, sometimes out in OneDrive, or SharePoint Online, I should say. So really like how to tie all those back together are some of the challenges we're facing. And Ben, I don't know if you want any to add that you've faced, or if you want to cover the benefits.
Good point in paying attention to the roadmap, knowing what the user interface is going to look like. It's a real challenge to stay up with that, and you log in any day and it could be totally different, which can make training difficult as well. I think some of the other challenges, there's the legal hold tool. It's just holding the data. It's not a custodian notification tool that some people might be used to using when they're issuing legal holds. Out of the box, Microsoft does not provide that. It's been mentioned on the roadmap, probably be something that falls under an E5 license if and when it comes out. But so you need to have a process for notifying people and tracking that they've, provided notification or clearance that they acknowledge receipt of the hold. If you're a company like most, you issue a survey to your custodians to find out where the data is. So you need to have a mechanism for continuing to do that. You can't rely on Office 365 to provide that for you. I think that some of the benefits are that this is giving companies a tool that they might not have ever had before, and they're able to hold in place electronic files, and that's something that they probably have never been able to do. That's not creating a duplicate file and creating a record management nightmare. It's literally holding the data in place. Everybody keeps working, nobody's none the wiser, but giving you the tools for information governance and eDiscovery that you've never had. I think that's a massive benefit.
Yeah, I would just add that we were able to update our preservation notices, so we no longer have to tell custodians to move their relevant emails to a separate folder to ensure that they don't get deleted. So now we don't have to worry about the custodian accidentally deleting anything, because once that hold is in place, it's in a separate hold. Well, not separate, but it's held in place, and even if the user deletes it, it's going to be there for eDiscovery purposes.
So thank you, Ben and Samantha. So maybe just sort of follow up to some of the points you made. In your experiences at Wendy's and Fidelity, who exactly is implementing that hold? We talked a little bit before. Ben mentioned permissions and having certain licensing. Is this something that anybody can do, or are there specific people that are asked to do it at your institutions that have certain either rights or knowledge or experience doing that?
Sean, I'm happy to take that one. So technically, to answer your question, the only people that can do this are ones that have access to the eDiscovery Center within that Security and Compliance Center I mentioned earlier. So, not only do you have to make sure you have access to security and compliance, you further need access to the eDiscovery Center. And there's two types of users within that, the eDiscovery Manager and the eDiscovery Admin. And despite the name, the manager is actually the higher level of the two roles. The eDiscovery Manager has access to every matter that's created within the eDiscovery Center, and they can also add or remove users to a given matter. Whereas the eDiscovery Admin is more of a user role, and they can only do the functions of within the matters that they've been assigned to. That's the only matters they can see. It's the only ones they can put a hold, search, etc. I point this out because lots of people, not lots, but a larger segment of the company is going to have access to the Security and Compliance Center, which also has content search. So you want to make sure you have access to eDiscovery Center, and that's where you're doing this work, not within content search where the rest of the people that have access to the security and compliance can see what you're doing. This is confidential work and typically done by the legal department, and so you need to be in the eDiscovery Center. You need to have a relationship with IT to know what rights you have and to get the rights that you need to be able to perform your job properly.
Thank you. To sort of move on, Ben mentioned a lot about doing content search just a few minutes ago. So I kind of want to kick it to the next topic, and here I'll ask Greg Cancilla to jump in. Greg, I know you've had to do a lot of work in Office 365 to get data out of it for our clients. What are some of the key things we should be mindful of when running searches to preserve and collect data in Office 365?
Thanks, Sean. So essentially when performing searches within Office 365, there's two main categories of files that you need to be aware of. Those are the indexed files, and I'm sure what everybody's heard of, the unindexed files. Indexed files are essentially any files that are text-based, the most common type being Microsoft Office-based files. Unindexed items are most commonly the image type files, JPEG, GIF, graphics that we're all used to, password protected or encrypted files, or even files that exceed the maximum allowable size in Office 365. That's one thing that I don't think everybody grasps when they're performing searches within 365. The maximum allowable size of an Excel file is 4 meg. So any Excel file that is larger than that will be marked as unindexed, and unindexed items are not searchable within Office 365 via content search. So you need to be aware of that when you're performing those searches within 365 as opposed to collecting a full mailbox. When you apply those search terms within there, you just need to understand that Excel files greater than 4 gig or 4 meg won't be searched, and things like that. Office 365 also offers multiple ways to perform searches on the indexed data within your tenant. One of the best things about Office 365 is that the data is indexed in real time, meaning there's no waiting for data to be indexed when you want to perform a search like you would in a normal eDiscovery tool. The two most common ways to search Office 365 are the web-based interface, like I know Ben and Samantha had mentioned earlier, which is called Microsoft's Content Search. And the second way is what we call a PowerShell script. The web-based content search provides a user-friendly way to perform the searches. These searches can be easily customized based on built-in conditions to allow you to search using specific criteria such as date, sender, participants, or various other properties. PowerShell scripts are another way to search the data within Office 365. PowerShell scripts are typically performed by more advanced users, but I find them to be very useful for running multiple complex search queries across a variety of data sources within your tenant. PowerShell scripts do not offer the graphical point-and-click user-friendly searching options, but they can be very robust once you build an understanding of how those work. Both the content search and PowerShell scripts allow you to perform the same types of searches using Boolean and proximity type searches that everybody's familiar with. These search capabilities are the same type of searches that would be performed using the standard eDiscovery search process. So formulating your search terms is really no different than it would be using a traditional eDiscovery platform. Although there's no limit on how many mailboxes we can search within Office 365 or how many content searches can be run, there are some limitations of the searching that you should be aware of, such as the maximum number of characters for a search query is 10,000, and the maximum number of alpha characters is wildcards is 3. So there are some things to be aware of within the searching capabilities of Office 365 that you typically wouldn't have to be aware of in a standard eDiscovery tool. Office 365 also gives you the ability to search across the entire O365 environment, or to limit those searches just to specific mailboxes, SharePoint site, Teams sites. So you can limit that realm of what you want to search down to just mailboxes or other extraneous data that may reside within Office 365. Keep in mind, any mailboxes that you had previously placed on litigation hold will also search the content within that litigation hold. So if a user is placed on litigation hold, they delete a message, and that message is responses to a search that you have run, it will be included within your search results, even though it's been deleted by that user. Mailboxes that have an E5 license also have the ability to promote their search results into the advanced eDiscovery platform, allowing them to further refine those search results. In the advanced eDiscovery platform, you can perform functions such as OCR, near duplicate detection, email threading, themes, and even predictive coding, which isn't available to the E3 license holder. One thing to keep in mind is that once the data has been promoted to advanced eDiscovery, there will be some lag time. As that data gets promoted, it will then need to be re-indexed. So it's not it's not a search like you would do within a content search. Once you promote that data, it has to be re-indexed. It's not that on-demand type searching that we're typically used to seeing within the content search. After your searches have been run, Office 365 provides detailed search summaries to give you a general overview of the locations with the search hits, the number of search hits, the resultant data sizes. Additionally, those summaries also allow you to get an idea of how large the unindexed data set will be. And Ben and Samantha, that was one thing that I know we had talked about a little bit earlier here. What do you see with those search term reports that come out of Office 365 as far as the unindexed data goes, and any kind of relevance that may be from those reports? Anything that you guys can add there?
Well, I'll jump in and, so currently we are not using search terms in Security and Compliance Center. Initially we saw some discrepancies, so we are relying on our additional tool for applying search terms, which is EnCase. But the reports we've found helpful, to kind of just really check ourselves to make sure that the searches seem to be running. Because, if you run a search and you get 0 hits, maybe we didn't run it appropriately. So it helps with that, and also to get a good idea of the volume of unindexed items, which is another reason why we're using EnCase to apply search terms. So it helps with that, as well as, to help you figure out what the volume's like and budget some of your discovery. So that's kind of how we're using them minimally.
Greg, you mentioned before, I wanted to come back to some of the PowerShell piece and some of the functionality you mentioned. How would you describe the interface for a user to do that kind of searching? PowerShell obviously is a form of scripting, which I imagine requires some technical expertise. But then there's also the Security and Compliance Center where you can run searches. What kind of knowledge or experience do you need to have in order to effectively run searches to ensure you're capturing the data that you want to preserve or collect effectively?
Sure. In PowerShell script, I would compare it almost to like the old MS-DOS environment, where it's a command line type environment. You type commands, data comes back. So essentially what you need to do within the PowerShell environment is you need to establish a connection to your O365 tenant. Once you've established that connection, you have to use some predefined type terms in order to access or search within those mailboxes. It does provide a lot more flexibility in what you can do than the content search would, just in that the content search is a GUI and you're limited to exactly what it has in there. I want to search this mailbox. Here's the 4 filters I want to apply. They give you those common filters that you would apply in a nice, easy way to go through it, which is okay for most users. The PowerShell, I would say, is more for the advanced users looking to apply some complex searching or complex terms or search across multiple mailboxes. That kind of thing, I think, is better done in PowerShell, but there is some knowledge and some learning curve involved with that in going out and being able to use these PowerShell scripts.
Okay.
I would quickly add that PowerShell, while advanced, is also a good reason to have a good relationship with IT. There might be somebody in IT that is doing PowerShell scripting outside of Office 365 or within it, but for other parts of it. That could be your person to help write scripts within the eDiscovery Center to help you out.
And Ben, that's a great point. I mean, the PowerShell isn't limited. It's not proprietary technology just to Office 365. PowerShell is something that's been around for years. So there are people that are well versed in this, understand how to use it. It's just some different terms and different command lines in order to connect to that 365 environment. But there are people very familiar with it.
Are there, at least for PowerShell, does Microsoft offer sort of canned scripts that are that Office 365 users can, like a library that they can go to, or does it require somebody to sort of create them as required for the business?
There is. And so there's samples out there all over the place on Microsoft blogs that you can go out and kind of, if you're looking to run a search or you're looking to search on specific parameters within the 365 environment, there are certain terms and examples and things that you could take from the Microsoft knowledge base that you could then apply to your situation in order to search for certain keywords or date filter things down or search by certain metadata within the 365 environment.
Okay. So we started to touch a little bit about reporting. Greg, you had mentioned some, I don't think you called it reports, but some information you get out of your either collection or search results, search term reporting you had asked Samantha about. I was actually wondering maybe, Samantha, if you can go into any of the types of reports you work with in Office 365 or provide some insight on reporting in Office 365.
Yeah, so we are not using them heavily, so I'm not sure if, Ben, you have any better experience, but we're really just using them, for the hit counts of our search results and not unindexed items. That's the extent we're using them currently.
Yeah, this is Ben. I wouldn't say that we're using the reporting capabilities in depth by any means, but whenever we get to this point where Greg's at, we did the search, we now have our collection, and we are to the point where we could export it, but we kind of want to know what we have. That's the reporting that is most common and most useful to us. You can run reports on what the data is that's going to be exported without exporting the data. So you get the Excel file that basically pretends like it was exported and shows you everything that happened without actually moving that data out yet. So it gives you multiple files. It gives you a report of all the everything that's in the searchable items, I would say, and then a separate Excel file with all the unindexed. And that can be really helpful to go in and if you follow the path, it provides all the metadata for everything that's in there. So you can follow the file path and kind of get an idea of what that unindexed item is. Maybe it was a flat PDF or a PDF that was too large for Microsoft to index, or maybe it's a voicemail, or you can see, all right, it's in this folder within Outlook. That's where voicemails are stored, or kind of use that report to get an idea of what those unindexed items are. Outside of the reports that come with the export, we don't run a lot of them. Whenever you're looking at a collection within Office 365, you can view the statistics, like Samantha referenced. That'll tell you the size, the total size of the collection, how many items account, and then what size is indexed versus unindexed. And there's also a preview results button in those file statistics. We use the preview. It's not robust. It has some limitations, but it gives you a percentage of the total number of items found in the collection in preview. So if you had, it seems to be around 10%, I believe. So if you had 10,000 items that you collected, you're going to get 1,000 in preview. It used to be only 100, and it's changed in the past 6 months, I think, to be a percentage. But that's still limited to text items. So if it can index it, if it can read it, it'll show you in preview. If it's indexed but it's not text, you have the option to download the item and open it in its native application so you can see what it is. That can be a little cumbersome. If you had to do that for a lot of items, this would be not helpful at all. But kind of depending on the matter, you might be able to use the unindexed report in Excel and the preview to get a real good understanding of what you have and then know, all right, this is how I'm going to proceed from here on to finish this matter out.
And Ben, that just to add to that, I mean, that's key as far as the preview goes too. That's one of the differentiators also between the content search and the PowerShell. In that content search, when you run those searches, you do get that option to preview. And when it's a preview, I want to say it's a full preview, but like you said, there are some things that you would otherwise need to download to see the full part of that message. But you could actually go in and review the content of the message. Where did it hit within the email or whatever it may be? So that preview is a good functionality. The other thing I would add to that is actually two other things here. The unindexed data, the big part of that, I know we talked about it, is you could see a data volume with that. So the unindexed items are the stuff that would probably have to go to a vendor for further processing. So you could let a vendor know, hey, I got 20 gigs worth of unindexed data coming your way that we need to, apply the searches to, OCR, do whatever we need to do. And you could get a cost associated with doing that unindexed item search. The last thing I would add is the other kind of reports. The reports that I had talked about originally were more of the user reports that they see from the front interface of the content search. The other reports that you had touched on a little bit, Ben, were the export reports. And those are very valuable to us because a lot of times when you download data from Office 365, meaning you pull it out of the Office 365 environment into a PST or a native file or whatever it may be, and you do encounter errors, there are those export logs that come with it. So you could take a look at those export logs and figure out why. A lot of times, it's very basic. The path's too long. We need to shorten our path. There's some, you're downloading to a data source you can't download to. There's a lot of stuff that that's involved with that those export logs could then help you iron out.
Great. So now that we've gotten through searching and we've talked about reporting, one of the next steps in all of this is actually getting the data out of Office 365. So, Greg, I know you've done a lot of this for our clients. Can you tell us what we're able to export from Office 365? And can you go into a little bit of how the licensing that we talked about at the beginning of this, the E3 versus the E5, impact what I can and cannot export?
Sure. Once the searches have been run, you can then export the data set out of Office 365 using the Office 365 eDiscovery export tool is what they call it. By using the eDiscovery export tool, you can export the search results in various formats, one being in the most common, which is the PST files. When exporting out search results as opposed to full mailboxes, you also have the option of exporting out the unindexed items into a separate PST file for further processing using a more traditional eDiscovery tool. Non-email files can also be exported out from things like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and among other things. Mailboxes that are processed through the advanced eDiscovery platform, which is the E5 license, Those also can be exported out into a processed format with a load file, so you can load that data directly into Relativity. So there's one difference between the E3 and the E5 license. The E3 license, we export the data out into those native files, meaning PSTs, Word documents, Excel, which would need further processing to load directly into a Relativity environment. Whereas if you go into the advanced eDiscovery tool, you perform your searches, you call stuff down, you can actually export out directly with that load file. So all you would need to do is push it into a hosting environment. One of the things to consider when exporting the data out of Office 365 is the data size. By default, Office 365 automatically splits PST exports at 10 gigabytes. Depending on what is being done with the PST files, you may have to further reduce that data size so that it can be handled properly once exported. You may also want to consider where you export the data to. If the data is going to a processing vendor for further processing or hosting, many times you can simply provide them with the export key and they can download it directly. These export keys have an added layer of security to them, and that they are controlled and managed by the corporate administrator and can be revoked at any time, ensuring you have complete control over the data. That's very important and something that we see all the time, how we get data directly from corporate clients. So if they are in that Office 365 environment, they do choose to run their searches, they can actually just send us the export key and we can download directly from them that resultant set from their searches. So it makes it, you don't have to go to your Azure blob or you don't have to post it to an FTP. The vendor can directly download it using that export key. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, if there's ever any issues, the corporate client can then revoke that that license to you for that key, so you'd no longer have access to that data. Depending on the license type of the user, oftentimes the data has been exported from Office 365 will not need to be processed for further review. However, there's still things you want to consider before deciding to process your data within Office 365 or not. These considerations include the ability to deduplicate against other data within the non-Office 365 environment. Most of the time, the Office 365 data will need to be reprocessed in order to deduplicate against non-Office 365 data. Unindexed items will always be required to be processed outside of the Office 365 environment, as traditional eDiscovery tools offer a more robust ability to process various problematic Office 365 file types. Finally, the reporting built into Office 365 is somewhat limited. Most of the times, the reporting that is provided by Office 365 is sufficient, but it's not able to provide the same level of granular reporting that a traditional eDiscovery processing environment can. Ben and Samantha, that's one thing, from the corporate side. I don't know how much you've seen it. Samantha, I know you guys don't search as much within 365, but Ben, have you seen from that, when you take the results of Office 365 and you have to deduplicate against data that may be stored in your network or otherwise, do you ever run into any kind of problems with that or issues with that? I know that's one thing we get a lot from our clients.
We haven't yet, fortunately.
I would say that, we don't do any deduping within Office 365. But yeah, the fact that you have to send it to the vendor and have anything done is a little frustrating. That's that debate that you have between the E3 and the E5.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we see is a lot of times people in Office 365, the corporates, they're not fully there, meaning they'll have their mail within 365, but their network shared data may still reside, locally or whatever it may be. They may have some files in 365. So deduplicating against data from 365 against data on your local network, we still have to reprocess some of that data in order to deduplicate it. So that's one thing to keep in mind too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think as long as there's a hybrid environment, it's going to present challenges.
So in listening to this, I know one of the things that I have heard clients when they've talked to us about their Office 365 environment, they are somewhat of sophisticated users. Some of their custodians, if you will, have gone to E5 licensing. They are familiar with current discovery practices like technology-assisted review and leveraging analytics to cull their data more. And I know Office 365 has some of those things built into it. It is almost advertised as being a one-stop solution for preservation, collection, maybe even leveraging analytics against some of the data to do a smarter cull, and then ultimately do an export with almost a format that should just go straight into any review platform, like Relativity, for example. But in listening to a lot of what we discussed today, it doesn't sound like that is as cookie cutter or as simple as maybe we would like it to be. It sounds as if there's still some challenges that each business is facing, whether it's Wendy's or Fidelity, if not other clients that we've heard. Can you, maybe Ben and Samantha, just talk about whether you would ever consider using E5 licensing as a one-stop shop for collection and processing and potentially even review? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Sure, I can start out if you want, Ben.
Go ahead.
We're trying to get a set of E5 licenses that we can test on to really, get in there and understand how it works, to see if it would bring big efficiencies and, cost savings to the company. But we have not been able to get in there yet. But from, meetings with Microsoft and, what I've seen on the roadmap, I do think there could be a lot of opportunity to actually, maybe even have review done in-house and allow our attorneys, either internally or externally, to come in and do some document review in E5 and flag documents. So I think there's a lot of great stuff to come. We just haven't gotten in there yet, but I'm hoping that's going to happen over the next few months.
Yeah, piggyback off what Samantha said, I think that the roadmap shows a lot of the new features that are going to come out for eDiscovery are most likely going to end up in the E5. So it's going to make it that much more attractive to people to make that upgrade from the E3 to the E5. And the features that are there now are advanced, and they do what they say they're going to do. There's still not the review and production piece of it, so you still need that once you get, if you're in an E5 and you use Inquivio to process, you still need to go into some type of review environment to finish. For us, this is a subscription product, and you're at an E3, you can go under normal contract guidelines, you can go from an E3 to an E5 at any time. But there's a true-up period, and so you need to stay at that E5 for the remainder. So the way we approach it is, if I have a matter that involves 10 custodians, is it worth, what are my options? Is moving 10 people from an E3 to an E5 and keeping them there for 12 months because of the license stipulations, what's the cost of that versus taking my export file and uploading it to RVM or, a third-party review platform and pay for the processing and everything there? What's the better option? And that's just what we weigh on a matter-by-matter basis.
Okay, so Greg, what are some of the challenges? We touched on this a little bit throughout the PowerPoint, but what are some of the challenges in using it as almost an end-all, be-all eDiscovery tool? What are some of the challenges that you've seen in the field?
And I think one of the biggest things, obviously we've touched on it, and I've said it over and over about the unindexed items, but that's probably the biggest challenge that we've experienced and that most of our clients have experienced, in that you can get it to a certain point within Office 365 to where you get things down to a filtered data set that you need to have processed. But the challenge is you still have these unindexed items at some point that you need to deal with, and they could be voluminous at some point in time too. Another thing that we run into, because a lot of clients do have this environment and they choose to run their searches within Office 365, but what we run into is they go out, search the data, provide us that PST and the unindexed items. Then they go back out and redo a search 2 weeks later. They give us a new PST with a new set of unindexed items. So the data starts to grow. I think what Ben said, he was spot on with what I've heard from a number of our clients, in that you need to weigh the difference in an E3 license to an E5 license, the cost of that for 12 months, as opposed to outsourcing it to a vendor. Because once you do get there to that E5 license, you have to stay there for 12 months. Not necessarily that mailbox, but someone has to stay there for that 12 months. So you have to weigh that cost with it. Now, the benefit of it is that going from an E3 to an E5 does allow you to have some more advanced capabilities. Those unindexed items will get smaller as you get into an E5 because there's more advanced searching capabilities within there, the OCRing ability, the deduplication ability, all that stuff that E5 offers you, there is a value to it. But at the end of it, you're still going to have some subset of unindexed data that you're going to have to deal with.
Okay. So I know just maybe some quick takeaways that we've heard throughout, and then we'll open the floor to some questions. Some questions came in through the chat that I'll pose to the panelists. But I think what we've heard here, first of all, know before you go. Having some knowledge about your Office 365 environment can be crucial because it allows you to plan effectively so that you know how to implement a limited scope, potentially, in your preservation, as well as what functionality you may have in order to execute certain tasks. I think the other thing, too, that we also heard from Ben and Samantha is understanding data retention policies and what data sources are affiliated with Office 365. So it is not to be assumed that all data sources within the company are managed through Office 365. I think our experience at RVM is that in most instances, it is really just email data, although some companies are starting to integrate other things like Yammer, or maybe even using things like SharePoint or OneDrive affiliated with Office 365. And so know what data sources are governed by Office 365. And finally, what is the legal hold process? As we noted earlier, Office 365 does not have a notification process. So there is still the aspect of notifying custodians or directors of IT or IT managers that legal holds are in place, and therefore retention needs to be observed of the relevant data sources. So you need to make sure that you've got a process for that, not just for sending notices out, but for tracking those notices as well. Maybe quickly to Ben and Samantha, obviously you guys probably see a variety of different matters. Some are internal investigations within the company. Others might be responses potentially to government subpoenas or general civil lawsuits. Maybe there's small employment matters or other larger civil lawsuits. Do you use Office 365 differently based on the goals you might have for those matters, or is it pretty much a streamlined workflow for you regardless of the size and scope of the matter?
This is Ben. It definitely varies by matter type. If it's a small matter, internal investigation, third-party subpoena, I'm able to do a quick, a small limited search on a set number of custodians, and that the results are small enough that I can use preview to get a good idea of what I have, and then export the results out. If it's all email, it's one PST file and then another one for unindexed. I can upload those into my Outlook and do review right in my own Outlook. If it's a little bit bigger matter, that's where I'm debating the cost of E5 versus the cost of exporting and uploading to third-party vendor like RVM. If it's a much bigger matter, complex, probably going to be bringing in that third-party vendor to help earlier in the stage and to help all the way through. Samantha, anything different?
Well, yeah, I would just say that we really just have one standard process right now, but I do think that will change. But we, being a highly regulated company, we have a whole separate compliance vault. So our data is really across many different sources. So currently we're doing it one way in Office 365, but I think that will change as other data sources move to the cloud.
All right, thank you. We did get a couple of questions, so if the panelists don't mind, I'd like to ask one or two of them while we have a couple of minutes left. One of the questions that came in is, what anomalies have we found with keyword searching in content search? Greg, I don't know, we've gone over this a little bit throughout the presentation. I don't know if you want to go into some of the anomalies you've seen.
Sure. What we've seen is in the keyword searching through the content search, there's a number of different things that you can get into. Again, I think Samantha had touched on it before too. We have seen some differences in that searching through the content search as opposed to exporting out a full mailbox, and that our numbers don't add up typically when we run a search through, a Nuix or an eCapture or what may be on a mailbox, from a full mailbox export from Office 365 to a search within Office 365 content search. So we have seen some discrepancies in the numbers of responsive hits based on Office 365 search versus a standard eDiscovery search. There may be reasons for that we've seen in some cases. Some, we haven't been able to determine the reasons, but there obviously is some issues and some discrepancies between those searches that we've seen. I think, Samantha, you've seen some of that stuff too, and anything to add to that?
No, just that that's what we're finding too. And different tools, search differently, so it's expected, but yeah.
So another question came in more for Ben and Samantha. When is the best time to implement legal holds? Do you find that you doing it on a case-by-case, project-by-project scenario is effective, or do you find that just having a broader, more permanent set of legal hold aspects in place for a longer period of time is effective?
So this is Sam. I'll just say that we try to target as much as possible. So we're doing it by matter and custodians, and I'm hopeful that in the near future we'll be doing it by date range as well.
Okay.
This is Ben. If you have relevant data, maybe I'm not interpreting the question properly, but if you have relevant data in Office 365, you need to be holding it somehow. Unless you have another third-party tool that's integrated into Office 365 and you're using that to hold the data, as soon as you reasonably anticipate litigation, that's your duty. You need to be in Office 365 creating a case and putting that relevant data on hold.
And Sean, this is Greg, just to add one thing to it. One thing that we've seen from our clients with the litigation hold, and I know we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but like Ben had mentioned earlier, is that there is no built-in notification to Office 365 when a legal hold is placed or litigation hold is placed. So one of the things we've seen a lot of our clients do at that point is they'll actually place mailboxes on litigation hold, and then they'll send emails to all of those people who have been placed on hold, so that email itself has been preserved within the litigation hold of Office 365, sort of as their hold notice. So after the litigation hold is in place, they send that email just to make sure that it's then captured, that they can show that they've placed that litigation hold on.
Excellent. Have you guys worked, Ben, you mentioned some third-party software or a solution. Have you guys worked with any third-party solutions to help manage the legal hold process through Office 365 and other data sources?
You could use a standalone legal hold tool that's not integrated with Office 365, just as your notification tool. I think a lot of companies had Clearwell in-house. That had a legal hold module to it. It's just not integrated with Office 365. So you go to one place and issue the hold, and then you go to another one and create the matter and put the data on hold. But there are starting to be companies out there that legal hold tools that integrate directly into Office 365. So you log into their system, you create the matter and the hold notice there, and when you issue that hold, it goes into your Office 365 environment and holds that data that you put in the case. So that's pretty handy. I look for Microsoft to provide that notification piece in the future so that you don't have to go to a third party, but for now, that's probably your best bet.
I know at RVM, one of our biggest suggestions to our clients is to use a solution like Xtero. They have a pretty sophisticated, if you will, solution for managing all different data sources, Office 365 being one of them, if you have to manage legal holds, both for notification as well as for flagging things for actual preservation. It looks like we're at the end of our time slot here, so I just wanted to thank our panelists for participating today. I think the information you've provided is extremely valuable, and we really hope that everybody that participated in the webinar today found the information that we provided informative. If there's any questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out to any one of us. Our email addresses are listed on the slide on your screen, and we'd be happy to follow up. And so thank you panelists very much, and thank you to all our attendees for participating today.